Construction Big Breakfast, where we give you a hearty serving of insider tips and business strategies to help fuel your day so you can thrive in the construction industry. Now, here's your host from Invennt.
Hi, welcome to another edition of the Construction Big Breakfast podcast with me, Cameron Foley, and my colleague here,
Alaa Khattab. Morning.
Morning, and welcome. Firstly, before we begin, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
It was very fruity breakfast, just one piece of banana, one piece of apple, and yeah, that's it.
Excellent. I had a banana and a cup of coffee, so that's what gets me going in the morning. So, Alaa, we are here to talk about concrete, and before the audience turns off, more specifically, this is about CO2 emissions during the production of cement and concrete. The concrete industry is a huge global industry, worth around about $50 billion a year. We produce around about 10 billion tons of the stuff every year, and it's used in infrastructure, it's used in building, it's an excellent material for construction. The main element, main constituent part, cement, and it's the second most used material in the world. You just give us a bit of an understanding around the production element of cement. Thank you.
As you rightly mentioned, Cameron, the production of the cement is massive. A yearly very big figures you already mentioned. It's the second consumed after the water. That means this invisible material got a lot of impact when it comes to the CO2. As per the Chatham House statistics, they said it's 88% of the global production of the CO2 that comes purely from the concrete sector. Technically speaking, actually, there are two ways that the concrete contributes or emit the CO2. The first one, we need the energy to produce the concrete, like any other industry. So in this case, the emission of the CO2 comes from the energy that we use, the fossil fuel. We call it. The second way is through the thermal process, or the decomposition process. When you produce the concrete, is the interaction between the concrete materials or the cement components. So through these two ways, the main CO2 come out of the concrete. As we said, 8% is a great figure. The researchers, they believe that they can reduce this to 4%, in a sense that 80% of the CO2 that emits from the concrete sector can be avoided.
I mean, it's a huge challenge for the concrete industry. What are they doing currently to mitigate?
As we mentioned, there are two ways. So we have to tackle the CO2 elements within these two ways of production of the CO2. We're talking about alternatives, obviously. So for the energy alternatives, we've got variety of alternatives. It's the wind energy, it's the solar energy, even it's the nuclear energy-based sort of fuel. There are low-grade, we call them, sort of fuel as well, or alternative energy for the production of the concrete, like the sewage sludges, for instance, like the biomass waste. The only problem with these, with some of the alternatives, actually, obviously, you've got to see low temperature when you use these elements to heat up the kiln. In this case, you produce lower CO2, which is what we want to, but at the same time, the standards and the quality of the concrete in this case is not guaranteed. And having said that, a lot of research had to be done actually to fulfill or to fill this existing gap in between the academics and between the production. This is one of the ways actually. So we talked about the energy in the first place. The second is about the material itself. If we manage to replace the clinker is the main component of the cement. Replace it completely, I would say, with one of the materials, or maybe blend it and mix it with other material that would also help to reduce the CO2. And there are a lot of tests has been done on some of the alternatives, additions or materials to the clinker. Some of them the waste from the the coal waste generation and the and other alternatives. The thing is, there is reluctance. This is the problem. Like, there were some tests around these elements, but there were a huge reluctance from the industry itself, which is a massive obstacle towards more adaptation of the technology. Part of it actually is the sector itself is controlled by few companies, or like tens, hundreds of companies, that they are the main producers of the concrete. So to do this change in their business model is something not easy to achieve, and it's taking time. And it's a slow, I would say. The investment on research for alternative materials is also not huge as compared to other sectors. And there is one technical big obstacle, I would say, which is the standards. We're talking about the safety regulations of the concrete. Is the main element for the buildings, and the safety of the buildings and the construction is something that comes first, but the environment as well, the climate change is also pressing issue now. If you want to replace, for instance, the clinker with totally new material, you need to introduce a new material that is equal in the performance or even had more advantageous aspects than the original materials. And this is something that hasn't been done yet, actually, by the producers of the concrete.
Why do you think that is? Because cement and concrete have been around for thousands of years. If you look at all the infrastructure around the globe and all the high-rise buildings that were constructed, looking at the hospitals, schools, prisons, military bases, concrete is everywhere. It's a material that's reliable. It's strong in compression. In tension, you can do things to it to help its strength. It's a hugely popular material, and to try and find an alternative to concrete, or certainly the constituent parts of concrete, it is a huge challenge in terms of research and development. There needs to be more money spent in terms of researching different materials. Are there elements out there that, as you said, from waste that we could reuse and recycle into that process? And really, a lot's being done at the moment, but there's always more to do.
It's not enough. A lot of things has been done to improve the situation, but we should be fair with the sector that they established sort of body to work about the climate change, the concrete nexuses. They named it the Global Cement and Concrete Association. So this body represents actually 35% of all of the concrete producers across over the world. But still, we're talking about 65%. They are not enrolled with this. Like the main target is this body is just to tackle the CO2 in each element of the concrete, and they are producing their reports and their statistics about their performance. So it's a huge step towards, I would say, achieving some targets of the CO2 within this sector. But still, a lot of things need to be, a lot of gaps, I would say, need to be filled. Which is not the main thing is it's not the concrete itself. It's not a single individual element. It's interlinked sector with other sectors. We earlier mentioned the energy sector. So any improvement with the energy sector will be impacting actually positively the concrete sector. The weakness point from my perspective actually is the search for alternatives. It's not seriously taken by the concrete producers. The excuses they put is the safety regulations, and there is a massive money issue around this as well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a point there around the safety aspects of it. Concrete, cement is well known. The properties of those two elements are well known. You can adjust various quantities in the concrete mix, and there are prescribed mixes out there. To introduce an alternative, I mean, it's, as I said before, it's taken us thousands of years to get to this point with concrete. We need to do more faster, and when we are introducing new elements to it, that takes an awful lot of research and development. and testing and trialling to make sure that there's a consistency of approach when introducing new materials. That is a challenge in itself.
Exactly. We need all as practitioners in this sector to look pragmatically about the situation, not positively the way that Trump is doing, or not, I would say, in a pessimistic way, the same as Greta is doing. We need to collectively to think about real serious steps. Climate change is serious. It might be dangerous in the very coming years. There are some positive signs came out of this sector. Still, they are not enough. We need to catch up.
Yeah, you're right. When you talk about the events and discussion points, the concrete industry or the cement industry is certainly right up there in terms of emitting the CO2 into the atmosphere. That in itself is a huge effect. It's just one of a number of industries that need to really focus in on itself and try to come up with alternative solutions. Certainly going forward, it's really important for our industry, the construction industry, that we're seen to be leading rather than following. And I do hope that the concrete industry comes together and tries to resolve this issue over the next few years. Many businesses, many construction businesses are committing to carbon zero by 2030, 2040. And how are we going to achieve that when the cement industry or the concrete industry is emitting such massive quantities of CO2 into the atmosphere? That in itself is a real conundrum there.
Is that the UK government committed actually to achieve this neutral carbon footprint by 2050, Scotland 2045. So they are not far away from us, and steps need to be taken.
Completely agree with you. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be posing some new challenges in our next podcast, so stay tuned.
At Invennt, we offer business development consulting to help you understand your market aims and win the opportunities you want. Head on over to www.invennt.com to speak with our team on how we can help. Thanks for joining us this week on the Construction Big Breakfast. Make sure to visit our website, www.invennt.com, where you can subscribe to the Construction Big Breakfast on all platforms so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a positive rating. Or if you'd simply share it with a friend, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.